Hi, I'm Don Cantor, former co-director of JLIC at Johns Hopkins University and current director at the Richmond Jewish Learning Experience in Richmond, Virginia.
And I'm Alex Ozar, co-director of JLIC at Yale University, and this is the Torah JLIC podcast. JLIC supports thousands of young Jews in their college years and beyond, providing them with the nourishment they need to sustain an upward trajectory of Jewish commitment and growth as they enter the broader world. And the animating engine of that effort, that has always been and will always be Talmud Torah, high-level, richly meaningful, thoughtfully creative Torah learning, ambitiously attuned to the realities of where our students are. On the Torah JLIC podcast, we hope to share some of that Torah with you. Thanks for listening.
On this episode, I get to interview my co-host, Rav Alex. Rav Alex is from St. Louis, Missouri, and studied at Yeshivat Keren B'Yavneh before receiving a BA and MA in philosophy and Jewish philosophy, as well as Smicha from Yeshiva University. Rav Alex is the co-director of JLIC at Yale and the campus rabbi at the Slifka Center. He has a PhD from Yale in philosophy and religious studies, as well as his own Torah JLIC Iyun podcast, where he explores the thought of Rav Hutner. He's published extensively on Jewish thought and ethics in various academic and Jewish journals, such as Harvard Theological Review, Jewish Studies Quarterly, and the Journal of Jewish Ethics, Tradition, and the Lehr House. Rav Alex, what is with you and Rav Hutner?
Oh, man, that's a deep question, and I'll do my best on one foot. What Rav Hutner offers is a kind of window or a gateway, something like that, whatever the metaphor is, fully within the confines of traditional Jewish life, with all that entails and all of the very real constrictions that entails, but also the richness and beauty and just fullness of spiritual life that entails. But again, it can be constricting. And what Rav Hutner offers is the possibility within that traditional framework of turning towards a totally open-ended horizon of thought and value. And then the learning itself is this just like wonderful, both intellectually and spiritually rich puzzle, where it's clear that what Rav Hutner is saying, what he's really getting at, is not quite on the surface. He makes you work for it. But also he's writing in this incredibly clear, focused, logically tight prose. And so you really can, whereas a lot of the Hasidic thinkers that he's working out of are much more fluid and flowy and associative, Hutner is very clear, logically precise. And so you really can, coming from a philosophical background, you really can do the work of reconstructing exactly what the argument is, but then still having to try to ask, like, what is Rav Hutner really after? And what's he trying to say? What's he trying to do? And what's he trying to get me to feel and experience and move towards through this argumentation? And I just find it to be an extraordinarily fruitful exercise.
And Rav Hutner himself was not a Chassid, but he engages in a lot of Hasidic thought.
Yeah, I think that for him it was a part of this sense of, on the one hand, this complete, unquestionable commitment to halacha and to everything that entails, and then again, the fullness of traditional Jewish life. But the sense, the kind of restlessness of the soul, where he senses, he just knows in the depth of his heart that he needs more than just compliance with the rules and with the standard expectations of a traditionalist Jewish life. And so he needs more, but the form of depth that he's after is precisely the kind of thing that you're not going to be able to articulate in propositional form. You can't just say, well, here's thesis 1 and here's thesis 2. You're going to adopt this idea and that idea, and then achieve the kind of depth and openness that he wants. It's going to require getting in touch with part of us that is precisely not subject to logical articulation in that way, getting in touch with deeper spiritual, often wild undercurrents of the soul. And Hasidus is part of the formula for him. But whereas many traditional thinkers, in his mind, maybe go a little bit too far and are given a little bit too much free rein, he is trying to bring them under some kind of rational control without losing the richness and dynamism that they offer. So it's a complex and challenging enterprise. Whether he's fully successful, I'm not sure. But I come to it with this. I find this just like deep, tantalizing hope that he's moved powerfully in the right direction, and that he can offer us sustenance for the many of us. And I think on some level, literally all of us, I think this is true, every human being has kind of existential, spiritual, philosophical open-endedness to who they are and what they're about and what they're looking for. For most people, most of the time, we get up in the morning and we have our routine. You get the kids out of the door and you go to davening, and then you go to work, and you come back and you take care of your affairs. Then you go to bed and you get up and do it again. And there isn't that much time or space. And this is part of what I want to talk about today. There isn't that much time or space for open-ended reflection about what this all means and what we should really be doing and what it's all about. But literally everybody is asking those questions on some level. And it may just be that 12 seconds in the shower when there's nothing else you could be doing, where it starts to eat at you. And I think what Rav Hutner is offering us is, without leaving those structures that give our life meaning and that ground who we are as Jews, and without in any way compromising on those, trying to pry open some space for open-ended reflection on what it's all about.
For anyone interested in Rav Hutner's Torah, check out Alex's podcast. Come for the Torah, stay to listen to Alex's dulcet voice.
Uh-huh.
Can you tell me what we're going to talk about today?
So, and Don, thanks in advance. I'm always grateful for our conversations, but this is something I really need a lot of help with, and I'm hoping that we can try to iron out some of these ideas. A few different starting points just to help get us situated with where I want to try to go. So the first was more general. I was at a conference that Tradition put on a couple of years ago, Tradition the Journal, and they published all the papers from the conference on I don't remember exactly what they called it, but on materialism, or the challenge of materialism in contemporary Jewish life. And there's a lot of serious concern and consternation about, there was some discussion of the Haredi Yeshivish community, but much of it appropriately focused on the modern Orthodox community. That's who was there. On one way to formulate it is the problem, or what presents as the problem, is a kind of materialist or consumerist excessiveness, that in the modern Orthodox worlds, there's an increasing drive for the trappings of upper middle class life. Everyone has to have the big house in the expensive neighborhood with the 2 or 3 fancy cars. Everyone has to go on fancy vacations and Pesach programs. And already Rav Lichtenstein, I think in the 90s, was worked up about, it's like, they have these glot kosher, I think he called it glot kosher hedonism was the term. You can go on these lavish cruises and they'll make sure that everything they check all the halachic boxes, but there's got to be something at least unsatisfying, if not wrong, from a Jewish perspective about this degree of materialist indulgence. And then the fact that it becomes a standard expectation and almost a ticket of entry for participation in modern Orthodox Jewish life. And there's this really tight correlation between socioeconomic success and participation in modern Orthodox life, like just demographically, we're like the wealthiest sub-demographic in the country, just on average. And then it just feels like it has to be that way for any given individual, just given both because of the costs of Orthodox Jewish life, and we don't just need day schools, but we need fancy day schools with all the trappings of the best college preparatory schools and all the fancy sports and programs and everything else, and beautiful buildings. And that costs a lot of money. And then you have to live in the right neighborhood, and that costs a huge amount of money. And then if everyone else is going on fancy vacations, you have to go on fancy vacations too. And then all of this is something that was pointed out at the conference by Rabbi Jeremy Weider. It was reflected a couple of times, and it used to be in could think of as like the golden age of American Orthodox Jewish success in like the 60s, 70s, and 80s, and in the post-war era, Orthodox Jews start getting really getting their feet under them, start getting self-confident and establishing themselves here in the United States and especially in suburbia. At the time, to be a successful Jew to be a successful Jewish child was to grow up and become a doctor, a lawyer, to go into the professions. You can make a really good living and support your family with dignity and even enjoy in some level materialist indulgence. You could live in the right neighborhoods and be a part of the right clubs. But also, I grew up with this ethic. I didn't follow my parents' or grandparents' wishes. I was certainly raised, I was supposed to become a doctor. And a big part of that, a central part of that, was because being a doctor is about helping other human beings and doing the vital work of caring for people. And our leader was saying, now he sees his Talmidim that there's such a powerful push for them to skip over the professions and go into fields like finance and investment banking. And that is seen as the just surest, cleanest way to get the kind of material success that's necessary. Because it's not enough just to make $300,000 a year. You need to make $500,000 a year or more if you want to sustain the contemporary modern Orthodox lifestyle. And he was just expressing this worry that we're losing something really vital, and that this maybe reflects something just deeply deficient in the way that we're approaching life now, that people feel like it's one thing if there's some set of people that are just really good at math, or this is their passion, or right now they find the opportunity, but that so many people are feeling driven like this is what they have to do, that seems problematic. So that was one frame, and I found it was a really rich and helpful discussion, but I also found it unsatisfying, and I was wanting to try to get a sense to dig a little bit deeper. Not just, one way to put this is we can put it in moralistic terms, as if all of this consumerism and materialism reflects us like doing something wrong. In a medieval Jewish framing, it would be in terms of the measure of like the quantity of our entanglement in materialist pleasures or in hedonic pursuit, in direct competition with the quantity of our investment in spiritual pursuits. And that's the challenge, is that we've tipped too far to the one side towards materialist indulgence. And so then the right response is a kind of discipline or ascetic regimen, cutting back and forcing ourselves into more spiritual or more focus on genuine transcendence and what really matters. And then the right mode for educating people and motivating people towards this end is a kind of moralistic critique, like getting up on the pulpit and telling people that this is bad and wrong and it needs to be fixed. And I don't think any of this is wrong, but it also doesn't seem to be to get to the root of what's happening here. I think it ignores a lot of just what's going on, the pressures, not just within the Orthodox Jewish world, but well beyond it, the pressures that every single individual coming of age in the 21st century faces. And I don't think that I think we need to get a tighter grip on the kind of anxieties and I think genuine fears that are pushing people into making these kinds of decisions and to leading this kind of lifestyle. And if we're going to approach this constructively and fruitfully, you can't just yell at people. We need to figure out and get to the bottom of what lack is this responding to? What are they missing in their life? And then we need to formulate not just a critique, but a positive program. We need to be able to put forward an ethic and a philosophy, a theology, and an entire spirit of a constructive spirit of what we're positively what we're looking for and what we're trying to create.
So would you say that objectively, or at least in a vacuum, there's nothing objectively right or wrong with wealth or with going into a job or finding a job in finance or anything like that? But when we have people when we have people in the Jewish community who are moving away from these jobs, migrating away from jobs that were that we're focused on helping people and things like that. And there seems to be more of a focus on just earning money to for whatever reasons that while there isn't anything objectively wrong with the pursuit per se, the fact that that's where the community is going indicates that we have some rethinking to do.
Exactly. So, and I think, so I was at this conference, and there's some Rosenzweig gave we can read it in tradition. They're very, in his style, detailed, exhaustive discussion of approaches to material accumulation in Jewish sources. And, it's obvious, and I think it's a standard, certainly within the modern Orthodox world, but certainly and beyond it too. You can make the case from various Jewish sources that we ought to lead a extremely lean, materially lean existence. But you can also make the case very easily that wealth and abundance are signs of divine blessing. This is the way things are supposed to be. This is what God promises us in exchange for doing what we're supposed to do. And that on a moral and certainly on a halachic level, all that's asked of us is that we dispose of our wealth properly, which means giving the right amount to tzedakah and ensuring that other people have what they need. But there doesn't seem to be anything wrong directly with making money, having money, and spending money. These things are all good and fine. But I think many people are noticing that there's something off, there's something disordered about our relationship with money and abundance. There's something we haven't figured out about it. And I really want to put it in firm but gentle terms. I think, but I hope constructive terms. The question is not just what are we doing wrong, but we have this actually maybe unique opportunity in the history of humanity. There's always been some number of people who've had wealth, almost always, or many points in history. There have been wealthy Jews, but there's never been a period in human history where even the poorest, most indigent among us comparatively live like kings compared to people in the Middle Ages. And the opportunities, I think we'll talk a little bit about how this is shrinking to some extent, but in a place like the United States, if you work hard enough, it's a political slogan, but there really is some truth to the idea that you don't necessarily need to be born into the noble classes in order to make a lot of money. And that's all great. But I think we have this, it's a challenge and an opportunity to think constructively and think Jewishly about what this should represent for us. And so that was like one background piece. So then I wanted to reflect on our work with our students, where they're going through this in real time. And I see part of this is, and I went to Yeshiva University, which had one set of just like cultural modes expectation for what people were doing and how they were approaching their college years and what that meant for them going forward. And Yale is similar but different. But also, I think, I went to college 20 years ago, and things have intensified even just in the last few years, and the world is a different place. And wanting to think about what that means. So I was at a meeting last week with it's called Yale Religious Ministries. So it's like various chaplains from every salient religious group that has a presence on campus. There's various Christian groups, and there's a Buddhist chaplain and a couple Muslim chaplains and a Hindu chaplain. It was all the religious professionals on campus. And we all met with the president of the university. And it was a totally open session. She was there she's new. She just started last year, and she just wanted to hear from everyone in the room what's on your minds, and what can I as the president do. And it was amazing. We had an hour. I think about 40 to 45 minutes of that hour were chaplains expressing this deep concern about the pressures we are putting on our students to achieve long-term material success at the age of 18 or 19. And a lot of this starts way before they get to a place like Yale. These kids from a very young age, everything now, we have such a better grasp of what long-term success looks like or can look like. We basically have a picture of that. And you can map out exactly what you need to have done by age 7 and age 10 and age 12. You can write out a program and an itinerary, and you can hire expensive consultants who will help coach your kids on exactly what they're supposed to do when they're age 12 and age 14, how they're supposed to spend their time, what kinds of clubs they should be involved in, what kinds of programs they should be working on, what books they should be reading, so that they can get into an Ivy League college. And then they get into an Ivy League college, and it doesn't stop there. There's an amazing thing, like this was published in the Atlantic last year. Yale has a wealth of public service oriented clubs where students come in, like you can join the club to serve incarcerated individuals in the area, or to do really constructive, really interesting work on homelessness in the New Haven area, whatever it is. And increasingly, participation in these clubs has itself become incredibly competitive. Like, you can't just volunteer, you need to apply and then prove that you are the best at, you will be the best at serving the homeless population in New Haven. And you're competing with all of your peers. And so these students they're so in this mode of this is what life is supposed to be like, that they reproduce it on their own. And this just keeps, and so these chaplains for 40 minutes were like begging the university president, like, what can we do to help students slow down? We need to like help them know, like, you've got 4 years of this 4-year opportunity to study whatever you want, to explore, to find new horizons, to just think and reflect about what really matters to you, and to make friends and relationships, not just because you're networking so that you'll have connections when you try to get into the business world, but just because they matter, and set yourself up for a life of meaning and purpose and everything else. And I just had the sense of like, well, sure, there's some things we can do or maybe there's some things a university president could do to make this a little bit better. But it's obviously the case that there's a much deeper problem here that we as religious professionals need to address. Some of this is going to be well beyond our control because these are forces coming from just the nature of the contemporary economy and just contemporary political reality that we can't control. But we need to be thinking constructively and productively about what we can do as religious professionals to help our students lead lives of purpose and meaning. So that's the frame.
Okay. So just a couple things. One is, how representative of the general population do you think the environment at Yale is?
I don't know. I don't have anything fully comprehensive here, real data. But my sense is my guess is that it's actually basically representative. I think like the kinds of opportunities that people at Yale have maybe are a little different. Like they're being recruited by Goldman Sachs in their freshman and sophomore years, which didn't happen to me at Yeshiva University. And so that there's definitely an intensification of some of these pressures. But I do want to say, I also think it goes in the other direction too. And I want to be clear about this. I think on a lot of different fronts, people in our kinds of positions, Don, like worry and complain a lot about the state of the youth. This is sort of just like a standard, the next generation is worries about the generation beyond them. Like, in our day, things were great, but now things are disaster. And I actually want to say so many of our students I find the way they conduct their lives so incredibly inspiring precisely on this front. That, like, again, they are facing pressures and just a mode of existence that was foreign to me at their age. Like social media everyone talks about it, as they should, and cell phone use has transformed human life, and it means that they have just so little space of just like open-ended blank nothingness and boredom that for us provided the just opportunity for reflection and just like would I have spent anywhere near the amount of time as I did learning Gemara in college if I had a smartphone at the time? Like, probably not. I don't know. I just don't know. But I actually see so many of our students not just like they have a healthier relationship with social media than I do. Like they've really, at the age of 18, maybe earlier, have like figured out what they want to get out of it, what they don't want to get out of it, what they need to avoid in order to lead a productive life, and they make a plan and they stick to it. And I see so many students in like what I really think is a pretty bleak economic environment. Bleak just in the sense of like there isn't a sense of like real options. But they're really pushing and searching and working to find the margins of meaning within contemporary constraints. And they carve out time and they carve out space for the pursuit of real value and friendships and community. And so all of that, I think, like you get the worst of it at Yale, but you also get the best of it. And I assume the rest of the population is more or less around the same distribution.
Right. Yeah. I also found myself really inspired and excited by the commitment of the students that I worked with when we were at Hopkins. But I also wonder if how much a place like Yale or even Hopkins is representative. And I wonder if maybe we could say that while some people going to Yeshiva University didn't just fail to get into Yale. I mean, sometimes it's just a choice, and it is about our values. And maybe their parents didn't feel that it was important to hire the tutors when they were 14 years old and get advice on how to get into an Ivy League. But when there is a certain amount of prestige and value that we, even in the Jewish community, place on getting into a school like that, the extreme can be indicative of what the values are, even if they're not always that extreme.
Yeah, I think it's definitely real. So I guess the way to put this, I appreciate your pushing on it, is it may be that what I'm seeing at Yale and what you saw at Hopkins is a lot of these trends in their purest forms on both sides. So we're seeing the like worst expressions of these trends, and then we're also seeing the most inspiring forms of pushing back against them.
And so I had one other question from what you were saying before, and that's it's really interesting when you were describing people competing to get into clubs that would serve other people. In a vacuum, it sounds wonderful that this is what we're competing for. But if we're really not competing because it's a value to help other people, but because this is going to help me get ahead in one way or the other, then it kind of turns into being a little ugly.
Yeah. So it's corrupting. I mean, this serving the people around us should be a pure and wholesome activity, and then it becomes also it on top of that, and maybe replacing that, it can become just one more means of acquiring social capital. There's material capital and there's social capital, which you need in order to get more material capital. And it just becomes a part of everything that we do now. And again, this was always true. It was always the case that you had to do various things to get ahead. But what's changed, if anything, is just in the intensification and the relentlessness of it. Students know, and at 18, 19, they know if they want to get that job at Goldman Sachs at 22 or whatever it is, they need to have the right things on the resume. They need to have the right connections. And that all comes with, you need to have the right, perfectly curated social media profile, which then means that everything you do, including your leisure activities and the fun that you have and just the time you spend with your friends, becomes itself a leverageable commodity towards the accrual of social capital, and then it's relentless. You can't avoid it. And I was reflecting on this even just in my own work as a rabbi. It really is relentless. It's a part of who I am and a part of what I'm supposed to be about. And my role is to learn and teach Torah Lishma. But I find it effectively impossible at this point in my life to learn Torah without, like, at very least somewhere in the back of my head, paying some attention to the market potentialities of what I'm doing. So if it's, I'm learning, I do Mishnah Yomi every day. And so like I'm learning Mishnah Yomi, so it's like, well, I have a big WhatsApp group with 400 people in it, where I should have, so it's a part of my job, which I'm paid for. Which I want to talk a little bit more about the way the halacha formulates this and deals with this. But if I'm, and then I'll be a little bit more competent and put together because I'll have mastered the canonical text a little bit better. And if I'm ever going on the rabbinic job market again, that'll matter. If I'm learning something more interesting and more obscure, it's in part so that, well, maybe I can turn this into a really interesting shiur or article that will increase my imprint in the world, get my name out there a little more, make people think I'm interesting and thoughtful and smart, and make people want to learn Torah from me and hire me as a scholar in residence and give me opportunities. And then there's this impulse to, I don't use Twitter because I think it's fundamentally evil and irredeemable, but I use Facebook. And a lot of it I think is really wonderful and productive and happy, at least for our generation. Where I really do stay in touch with people and have met people and been a part of communities of genuine intellectual and spiritual exchange. But still, that means that if I'm learning Torah, everything is well, this is something I could post an interesting thing about on Facebook and get some attention and like that. And even if I don't do that, still, that was a part of what's going on in the back of my head. So it's totally inescapable once there's this relentless opportunity to leverage everything that we do towards accrual social capital. And then it becomes irrational not to. Because none of us, nobody has, it's so rare to have one job for your career anymore. Nobody does that because nothing's stable that much. Nobody has a good enough job. Nobody has the security to really be able to do that anymore. You don't just get your union job and then do it forever. And rabbis certainly don't. You always need to be thinking about what might come next and where you're going to go. Yeah. So it's endless.
The fact that us trying to figure out how to teach Torah to people has become corrupted in a way very similar to people competing to get into clubs that help others just to get ahead. It seems like there's a consequentialist or transactional nature to what's going on. That it's that really what matters is what I can do to get ahead, and so I'm doing good things, but not necessarily for the right reasons. And I wonder how much you think that seeps into the way that even when we give tzedakah, it's never bad to be wealthy, or at least there are definitely strains of that thought in Jewish tradition. And the important thing is that you're responsible with it. But it seems like superficially, being a wealthy person who gives a lot of money isn't necessarily a definitive indicator that we have our priorities in order.
Yes, that's exactly it. So that's actually a really helpful segue to the positive contribution I want to try to make here. What I think that we, as rabbis, as Jews, need to be doing here in response to all of this, the most fruitful thing we can do, in addition to the condemnation and the calling to account, I think Judaism has, and halakha has at its core, a really powerful vision of what it means to be in touch with and honor intrinsic value, to do things just for the sake of, just because they matter. And I think we need, as Jews, to be much more self-consciously and reflectively doing the things we're doing anyway, which I'll talk about, but doing them in a countercultural spirit. We're thinking about the fact that we are pushing back against all of the pressures that are telling us everything that we do needs to be leveraged instrumentally, as you said, leveraged instrumentally towards the accrual of capital. Everything tells us that we ourselves are commodities, and we're always on the clock. We need to be shaping everything that we do needs to be a part of ordered towards getting ahead. And as Jews, we need to be thinking reflectively and aggressively about the ways that the Jewish practice pushes against that.
Can you just explain what it means to be countercultural and why in Judaism we're always talking about being countercultural? Is that a value to just whatever the culture is to counter it?
I don't want to say that. I don't think that's right. maybe it's close. Like it might be practically true because whatever world we're living in is always going to be corrupt to some degree just because we're human. And so it's always going to be the case that we need to figure out where we need to improve. And so we're always going to need to push. And I think part of this goes back to Avraham, was an Ivri on the other side, and identifying he's a part of this glorious, amazing, wealthy, flourishing Mesopotamian culture. Everything is good and happy, and he's supposed to grow up and work in the idol shop like his dad, and just be a good member, respectable member of gentlemanly, noble, aristocratic Mesopotamian society. And he's dissatisfied, and he sees, no, like, actually the world is on fire and we need to fight back and we need to leave. And Avram is actually, I don't think we talk enough about how Avram is such a radical example, right? Because we think of Judaism as having deeply conservative preservationist values. It's about tradition and honoring our parents and where they came from and what they taught us and what our teachers gave to us, and being responsible to the community around us. But Judaism is founded by somebody who the founding gesture of Judaism is God saying, leave everything behind, reject it all, and go start something new, burn it all down, and start a revolution. And I do think, so like that line of thinking, I think there's some anxiety about it in Chazal. They worry about, like, is it a problem that Avraham is abandoning his father? Is it like maybe that's sort of obscured in the text for that reason? Because we don't want people to worry about that, but like there's a real problem there. And so I think that this gets downplayed in the subsequent tradition, but it's really important. This is essential, and on some level, like the foundational aspect of what we're supposed to do. But yeah, I don't want to say, like, we shouldn't be oppositional for the sake of being oppositional. And part of doing this in the modern Orthodox frame is most of us, we don't want to reject everything. There's a lot of great stuff, to learn. And when I've got students in university, I'm encouraging them to take philosophy classes and arts classes, and like, this stuff all really matters. And actually, what I want to say is this is much deeper and wider than just, it's not Jews versus the world. I think this is actually, it's every individual human being against society as such. It's society, when we become collectives, there's a displacement of personal agency, and things grow and develop into systems that are out of the control of any given individual, and they can become oppressive. And I think the structure of economic forces that make it so hard for contemporary individuals to lead lives of meaning and purpose are powerful and everywhere. And it's something that every human being should be fighting against. And so when I say Jews should be countercultural, I think we should be leading a revolution on behalf of everybody. We should be saying, like, precisely as religious people who have this sense of and commitment to something higher, the idea that there's a commanding God who transcends not just the physical order, but I think transcends the economic order, and stands for the idea that there's a realm of intrinsic value. There are things that just matter because they matter, and not because they help you get ahead within the terrestrial worldly frame. We have a kind of access to that. I don't think we have a unique access to that, but we have our own special form of access to it. And we should be using it, and making a big deal out of it, and telling ourselves about it, and thinking about ourselves in those terms, and then telling the world about it.
What you said in the beginning was that human culture tends to make certain mistakes. And so the Torah asks us to think about that and lead lives that are intentional and not just going with the flow. And it doesn't mean categorically rejecting a certain culture, but it means being thoughtful about those things that we should accept, and making sure that we reject the things that and try to live lives that are counter to the culture, in whatever ways are necessary, because odds are there's something that should be countered.
Yeah, exactly. And we'll come back hopefully at the very end to where we started at the beginning. So in terms of how I think we should be thinking about engaging in materialist consumption, I actually there's so much great stuff in the world. There's real beauty. It's amazing. I'll talk, this is totally personal. I don't usually talk about this in public, so I'm actually a little embarrassed about it. So I'm a musician. I play guitar, and it's like it takes up a huge amount of my time and energy. I really enjoy it. I spend a lot of time on it. And I also have a really deep fixation with the like guitar musical equipment, like the guitars themselves. I've got a too big of a collection of guitars. I really like nice guitars with like, I'm not going to go into all the different kinds of features and variations. Somebody was in my house, 30 students in my living room for lunch on Shabbos, and one of them was like, are those like guitars really different in any way? And I saw like I died inside. I'm like, oh, they're completely like not. How could you ask that? But and then because you can get into the various types of guitars and exactly how the neck feels and different pickups and the wood choices. And then there's the amplifier, which and you can spend thousands and thousands of dollars getting and they're various kinds, and you can focus on like historical vintage kinds of things or contemporary trappings. And then there's millions of combinations of, they call them pedals, little boxes with circuits in them that you can use to modify the sound, and it is totally open and experimentation. And I spend a lot of my time on the internet exploring these things and learning about them and fantasizing about buying them, and sometimes I actually do. And I like spend time going to guitar stores and like different areas of Connecticut and like playing with stuff and exploring things. And I think that if this is a good thing, it's good because it's a focused and intentional discernment of genuine beauty. I like really am invested in the world, but in a way that is thoughtful and reflective and trying to get in touch with something that I think really does matter. I think beauty matters, and I'm trying to get to it. And I'm investing my energy in a way that like takes intelligence and care, patience to try to get at beauty. But also, I think it's obvious that this is my way of diverting my attention from what I'm anxious about in the world and in life, and a way of just like sinking my energies into diversion. I wind up spending money on things I obviously don't need, and like, is that good? I don't know. But the positive version is no. This actually really is a cultivated, thoughtful pursuit of beauty that I think is what we should be after. But okay, I want to talk about a few areas where I see halacha and traditional Jewish thinking putting forward this kind of view. So one, I think the most obvious is Shabbos. This is like, it's built into the structure, right? And Shabbos does not say you should not be an economic agent. You should not be trying to make money. The premise is Sheshet Yamim Tavot. You should work for 6 days. That's a large percentage of your life. You should be trying to provide for yourself and for your family and achieving material security and doing what you have to do, like living, and maybe even trying to like get nice things and buy that fancy amplifier you want, maybe. But there also has to be once every seventh day, you need to stop completely and completely refuse any engagement in productive labor. And so where in contemporary society, again, like every moment is potentially leverageable towards the accrual of capital. Judaism says that at least once per week for 25 hours, you need to stop. You'll go back to it on Saturday night. You'll pick up your phone again as soon as Shabbos is over and start thinking about everything you need to do, and then not actually get anything done on Saturday night, even though you have that, even it's the winter and you've got like 7 hours, but still somehow you get nothing done and then you feel guilty about it. But I think like, it's not just, if we take it to heart and we like reflect on what this means and we try to bring it into our lives, it's not just that one day a week. Like, I think this should, precisely as we're in the flow of things and the thick of our pursuits on the weekday, on Tuesday and Wednesday, the fact that once a week it has to stop, that means we're not allowing the mandate of productivity complete dominion. Like, we're saying that there's someone else in charge, even though you're like, we're going to let you win most of the time. But fundamentally, you're not in charge. There's someone else who can say this has to stop. And we can honor the fact that this has to stop. And that means it's now going to be, our materialist pursuit is going to be relativized. It's not going to be, we won't allow it to be absolute. And I think we need to, rabbis should be talking about this. We should all be thinking about this, and like this should be a central part of what it means to be a Jew, is that we are pushing back at least one day a week against the like relentless economic logic of everything needs to be an instrumentalist pursuit towards the accrual of capital.
So this is an interesting point, especially when you bring up Shabbos, because I think that we could say that for Shabbos observant people, they observe Shabbos. They follow all the halachot. They're not engaging for the most part in accruing at least monetary capital, maybe social capital. But there's a difference between checking that box and having the being transactional about it. That, you know what, I worked for 6 days and now this is what I got to do to serve the Lord. So I'm going to stop for the seventh. There's difference between that and what I think one perspective you can have on Kedusha and what holiness is, and what Shabbos is supposed to represent as a day that is holy and that is time that is sanctified, is that the way to make it sanctified isn't just to observe the rules, but is to allow the sanctity to imbue the mundane with value as well. And so if our observance of Shabbat isn't in some way affecting the rest of the other 6 days of the week and isn't reminding us about what actually is important, then that's a problem.
Exactly. That's exactly it. And because what I'm saying here is, I'm starting from the starting point is the community I'm working with and I'm a part of observes Shabbos. The idea here isn't like, let's do this new thing. No, it's let's reflect on what it means and let's like intentionally use it in this way. Let's bring the spirit of Shabbos into the rest of our lives and then think like, I can take this extra opportunity to make a little bit more money or to get ahead a little bit, but it's going to require that I sacrifice a huge amount of time with my family. So is that worth it? Maybe the answer is yes. I'm not here to tell you that the answer is no. Maybe you can't afford to turn down that opportunity. Or maybe it really is like such a good opportunity. It would be irrational and maybe even on some level vicious for you not to take it. But also you should pause and think that like maybe this is not what you need. And maybe the reason you're doing this is not because you're pursuing some good, but actually because you are anxious and scared. And you feel like if you don't take this opportunity, maybe things won't be all right. Maybe you just don't know how to say no to something like that because you've been so relentlessly trained and forced into leading this kind of life, that you'll feel unmoored and ungrounded if you don't go after it or if you say, you know what, I'm actually going to spend this extra time working on or spending time with the people that matter.
See, so it seems like a solution is not to alter observance in one way or the other, but to have a Jewish life, a life in general, which might be more examined as opposed to one that is unexamined.
Yeah, that is ultimately what this is about, like from a philosophical, spiritual perspective. And part of it, this was, I'll try to do this part very briefly. There's an amazing Michael Wishgrad was one of the more prominent Jewish philosophers in the 20th century. He's actually probably more well known among Christians than among Jews. He's a really, really interesting, thoughtful figure. So he wrote a book called The Body of Faith. And the end of the book, kind of random, he goes on this like kind of extended rant. He says, like, I go to, he's writing in the 1980s. It's like, I go to all these Jewish people's homes. He's like, he says he's not only talking about Orthodox Jews, but he's clearly talking primarily about Orthodox Jews. And he makes that clear. Like, I go to these people's homes and it's not that they're not wealthy or not that they don't have money and they don't have the capacity, but it's like their homes are so tacky. It's like the decor is just like, it's all just this like generic mass-produced consumerist nonsense and nothing is authentic. There's no real aesthetic appreciation and like certainly no aesthetic excellence. And when people do try to do something interesting, it just winds up being weird because it's not in the context of an organic culture of genuine aesthetic pursuit. And then he says, and actually, it's like, I think it's a huge problem on the other side of this, that there aren't really Jewish artists, or at least not very many. Because at that time, and all the Jews, the smart people and the talented people, go into law and medicine. But like, we supporting really talented people to go into art and music and literature? It's like, it just doesn't happen. And so, I acknowledge here that there's a kind of snobbish elitist about this. And my point is not to say that we need to invest our energies in optimizing our home decor. What he goes on to do is say, like, well, what's this really about? What does this mean? Why are Jews lacking in this way? And he says, what I think the real issue is that Orthodox Jews, now he says, first, it's an epistemic philosophical point. Orthodox Judaism requires a set of beliefs and premises about the existence of God and the involvement of God in our lives and the divinity of the Torah, and things that we know as modern rational people, we know are at least not provable or not like rationally demonstrable. And so there's a kind of anxiety about them. Like, are these things really true? And we don't have the self-confidence, self-assurance to really analyze it and talk about it openly. And so we repress the anxiety and the worry about it. And then that issues in a kind of rigidity where we just do things because that's what we're supposed to do. And that's what everyone else is doing. And we just conform to the community around us because we want to be a part of the community. But then you have a situation where everyone's house looks the way it does because they're just trying to look like the way everyone else's house looks because they just want to be a part of the community, but no one's really thinking about pursuing what actually matters to them as individuals. But then he says something I actually think is much more to the point. It's not just that we have these epistemic philosophical concerns. It's that most of us don't really feel the presence of God in our lives, or we're not in touch with it. And we lead an Orthodox Jewish life, which is premised on the direct involvement of God and a relationship with God, but we don't really feel it. And so then again, and we're too scared. We don't know how to talk about it. We don't have the vocabulary to talk about it. We don't have the communal structures, the forums where these kinds of things can be discussed openly and productively. And so again, we repress it and we become rigid and externally conformist, but we close off the realm of inner meaning. And so here, I want to say is like, and this Wishgrad was doing this in the 80s. I think part of what Orthodox Judaism needs is a much richer, more explicit conversation about the meaning of God and what it means to be in relationship with Hashem, and what it means, I think especially there's Emunah Bitachon, what it means to trust God. To place our faith and reliance on the divine. And so in our rational modern Orthodox world, that's not going to mean you get maximalist versions of bitachon in the tradition that say ideally you should just rely on God to fulfill all of your needs and give you everything that provide for you. And so you shouldn't be doing ideally you wouldn't be doing the basic ishtadlus to get the materials needs you need. And you shouldn't even be going to the doctor if you were really doing things the right way. But alas, we are weak and frail and vulnerable, and so we indulge in these things. No, I like that's not going to work. But I think that again, so much of what drives us in the contemporary world, I think, is a kind of anxiety and fear. It's, well, if I don't spend all of my time in every moment, it's not all geared towards productivity when I'm 18 and 19 and when I'm 12 and 13. And if every activity I do isn't geared towards the eventual accrual of capital, then I won't get ahead and I won't be able to live in the place that I want to live, in the neighborhood I want to live in. And I won't be able to have the vacations with my family that I'm supposed to have to be a part of the community that I want to be a part of. And I'm terrified of that. I'm terrified of just not fitting in and not meeting expectations. And so I need to even if it's not what I would have wanted, I need to go into finance because I need to make $1 million a year so that I can avoid run from the anxiety. And so putting that positively, we need a spirit and ethic philosophy of bitachon that says, no, actually also what matter, there are things that matter just because they matter. Torah matters, mitzvot matter, God matters, and the people around us matter. And just like life and beauty and goodness matter. And these should make a real claim on our time and our energy. And yes, you need to be able, it requires discipline and work to be able to sacrifice some of your economic productivity to devote yourselves to genuine meaning and purpose. And that is something we need to be thinking about and investing in as a community. How do we talk about and build support structures and build like reinforce to each other that we should feel confident, trusting in God that will be okay if we devote a little bit more of our time and energy to what truly matters.
Do you think that it's an issue with God, whether it's Wisharad's doubt that Orthodox Jews, or what his epistemic issues with Orthodox Judaism, and whether we actually kind of believe in God or all those things that we have, or that is that we don't have enough God in our lives, or is it that being a Jew, an Orthodox Jew, is difficult? It's hard, especially when we are living in other cultures, and so sometimes we can resort to following, like, superficially living lives as Orthodox Jews, checking all the boxes, living transactionally, but that's only because we're caught up in the culture. Really, the solution isn't to figure out whether we're supposed to give all our wealth away or talk more about God, but it's more having to do with how do we figure out how do we teach our children and live for ourselves a Judaism which informs our encounter with other cultures, as opposed to a culture which informs how we live our Judaism?
Amazing. So you're nailing these segues for me, Don. I really appreciate it. Yeah, I think Wishgrad is helpful. He diagnoses the underlying ideology here is that we're lacking in our relationship with God. This produces anxiety, and then that leads to kind of external conformity and rigidity. But I also think, and I meant it, that I think we need to be doing more to like cultivate a conversation and communal structures and forums around the existence of God, or relationship with Hashem and bitachon. But I also think like that kind of direct approach is not where it's at. That's not going to be what solves this problem. And like Judaism famously, we're not particularly good about this kind of direct theology, and like our inner experience is not the focus of Jewish life, never has been. And I think part of the genius of the Jewish model that it's not supposed to be. Like there are forms of Christianity and other religions where, and the idea is ensuring that you have the right internal spiritual state. But on the one hand, this can be morally extremely dangerous or salvagic. I think this is a lot of what his work is about, is that if you think what really matters is what's going on inside, that can actually become detached from what's going on externally and what you're actually doing. And so he talks, you could be the mafia boss who's ordering killings in the street, but then go into church and have a powerful, deep, edifying experience of prayer. But there's something really deeply wrong and bad about that. But also, it's just there's a limit to how much just talking about God is going to make anyone actually do it. What Judaism sees is that we require a life of thick practice that's everywhere. Every moment is filled with you do this and you do that, and our life is supposed to be shaped in these determinate, objective ways. And you say that it's difficult. It's really hard. And part of what I'm saying is I think we need to actually like lean into understanding and like acknowledging and appreciating just how difficult it is and how difficult it's supposed to be. The expectations of us are massive, and that's a challenge, but also I think it's providing us with an opportunity to say, like, if we can approach this challenge constructively and fruitfully and understand that we are in meeting this challenge acting really powerfully counterculturally, we're like doing something really amazing, wild and revolutionary, and showing ourselves and the world that we can invest our time and energy and capital in things that just matter just because they do, just because God said so. And so the last piece I wanted to focus on was the mitzvah of Talmud Torah itself. So I think Chazal actually like deliberately shape the mitzvah of Talmud Torah as a idealized anti-economic activity. It reflects that they have this really deep anxiety about economic pressures corrupting the spirit of Talmud Torah, and they very deliberately shape the mitzvah of Talmud Torah and the details of it in a way that accepts and understands the pressures that we're under, but that tries to push back against them. You see this on a few levels. One is just in the most general way, like fundamentally, the mitzvah of Talmud Torah is meant to take up our every waking moment. It should ideally displace all economic activity. Also understands that in real life, many tried that. Yes, and it just it doesn't work out in real life. And people who try this, it often will not work. Most of the time, will not work. And most people will not try this because they need to eat, and so they're going to work. And then once you start working, it's complicated to find time and find space to work. And so you start getting this articulation of like, well, use this many months, these months, you focus on your economic activity, and then you've got the rest of the time to do Talmud Torah. That maybe works in an agrarian society, but in the contemporary world, it's not like most people can't just work 2 months out of the year. We need to work the entirety of our lives. And you can't just like pick up and take off whenever you want. If you want to have long-term success, you need to be working all the time. You get, at the very minimum, just a articulation. This is already in the classical period of, all right, but at least find some amount of time in the day and at night, at least twice a day, some measure of kviyut, make Torah a firm commitment in your life, somewhere in your day. And make that, it's got to be firm, it's got to be fixed and disciplined. And so then even if it's only a few minutes out of the entirety of your day, still you've made this very powerful statement that this is what your day is fundamentally about, even though it's a tiny minority. And so like the discussion about Birchas HaTorah, this like was medieval consensus that like really obviously you should be making a Birchas HaTorah every time you sit down to learn if there were interruptions between. Why don't we? Because it's understood. It should be understood, and you should be reflectively embracing this all the time and reaffirming this to yourself that, yeah, I'm engaged most of my time in economic pursuits, but this is all so that I can get back to learning. And it may just be that few seconds of Yirach Hashem Yisrael after Birchas Torah in the morning, and then 5 minutes of learning at night before I fall asleep on the couch. But if I do that in the right spirit, that becomes what my day is fundamentally about. And so like Chazal are very sensitive to the relentlessness of economic pressures, but they're trying to find some way to express and make real the idea that there's one pursuit that we have that transcends the economic order. It's not about that. We do it just because it's what we're supposed to do, and just because it matters. And if we do that in the right way, that can then define everything else that we do. And you see, Chazal are very clear. They're very worried about people taking money to learn Torah. There's a Greek background to this also. Like Socrates is very upset that there are these sophists who go around teaching wisdom for money, and he makes fun of them and tries to subvert them. Because I'll have their version, and it's expressed in the Gemara in Nedarim. Ma'ani b'chinam, afata b'chinam. You're supposed to teach. It just is unclear if it's the ani there is God or Moshe, but we're given the Torah for free. It defies economic logic. So the Torah is a commodity, or could be a commodity. You can, in fact, make money off of it. There are people who will pay you for it. And so it's irrational. It's crazy not to make money when you can. But what the way Chazal formulate the idea of Torah is that it is given to us b'chinam, from God and from Moshe, and that it's supposed to be mahu afatah. You're supposed to emulate that. Part of the mitzvah of Talmud Torah is learning and then teaching for free something that you could have made money on. We're supposed to have, Talmud Torah is supposed to be a central site of our experience of pushing back against the relentless dominion of economic logic. We could make money, but we're going to say we're not going to. We're going to do this for free just because it matters. And then again, so in real life, it was never, it hasn't for last couple of millennia, has not been feasible to have a Torah society and culture without professional Torah teachers, and you cannot have professional Torah teachers who don't make salaries. And so it's always been the case. People actually have to take money for learning Torah. And so then the tradition has to develop mechanisms for this. So we say, all right, maybe it's schar batala. We're paying you for not going into finance so that you can teach Torah. And so it will pay you a little bit less than you would have made in finance, but we're going to pay you for that. Or we'll pay you, as the Gemara says, maybe we're paying you for schar, for teaching them pisuk tamim. It's very like certain aspects of the orthography rather than the Torah content. Or maybe if you teach children, we're paying you for the babysitting function of being a school teacher. But we're not really paying you for teaching Torah. And it's like, obviously we are paying you for teaching Torah, but the tradition is insisting on giving some expressive reality to this idea that what we're doing needs to be not about money. It needs to be about something else, even if money is a part of the equation. And we need to be we're acknowledging that it's honored and just recognized and accommodated by the halacha, but also the halacha is throwing everything it has at this problem to push back against it. And so I think, like, for us, thank God, there's a lot of Torah learning in our community. It's wonderful and amazing, and there should be more. And we need to be promoting it more. But what I want to say is that we need to be promoting it and putting it forward and reflecting on it and self-consciously embracing it as an anti-economic activity. That it's one of the few things we do, one of the few spaces in our lives where we invest our time and energy in something just because it matters, just because we're commanded to, just because it's valuable. And then my hope is that, again, just Shabbos, there's Talmud Torah, there's many other things. Like you said, there are a lot of sacrifices we make for traditional observant Jewish life. And my thinking is that if we do this self-consciously and reflectively and counterculturally, we're saying that the world is telling us that every moment needs to be economically productive. And we're saying, no, actually, there are things that just matter because they matter. And then we give ourselves some time and space to focus on those things. And we make it a point of discipline. We're going to try to do a little bit more every day and try to do it a little more self-consciously every day. And put ourselves as teachers of Torah, we're going to put ourselves forward to our students as representing the idea that these things just matter. And yeah, you've got your exams this week and you've got all your papers and it's a crazy world. And you're worried that if you spend too much time learning this week, that you're not going to get that internship this summer. And then if you don't get that internship this summer, you're not going to get the internship the next summer. And then you're not going to get the job you want. Then you're not going to get the promotion that you want. And then you're going to be condemned to living in a second-class neighborhood. And you're going to disappoint your parents, or whatever it is, whatever the anxieties are. We can help them, and we're not going to condemn them. We're not going to criticize them because these anxieties are real and they're rational. We're going to help build the strength and courage and resilience to also focus on what really matters, to make that what is ultimately really fundamental in their lives.
Rav Alex, thank you so much for thinking out loud with me today.
Thank you so much, John, for thinking aloud with me. It was an amazing conversation, incredibly helpful, and I hope fruitful.
Let's do it again.
Sounds good.